Hi, my name is Plootarc. Let's learn some effing history. The world has been under a nuclear war threat since World War II. The first and only time the world witnessed a nuclear weapon explosion was the US bombing on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki towards the end of World War II. The debate on the necessity of these bombings still remains. There have been many more instances where the world was at the brink of full-on nuclear war. One such instance was during the Cold War. During the Cold War, the US and Soviet Union built an arsenal of nuclear weapons to use against each other, just in case they got into a full-fledged war. By 1983, the relation between the two powers got worse. The then US President Reagan announced plans for a missile defense system. He also called the Soviet Union as, quote, an evil empire, end quote. The Kremlin assumed this was the US preparing for a nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. They believed that the US was preparing for a first strike. The Russians came up with a strategy. If they received any indication of an attack, they would use their arsenal. Needless to say, it was a time when both the powers expected a nuclear attack from the other. And if it wasn't for Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov, September 26, 1983, would have marked as the darkest day of mankind. Stanislav Petrov was born on 7th of September 1939. After graduating from college, he joined the Soviet Air Defense Forces in 1972. In the initial years of his career, Petrov was assigned to Serpukhov 15, which is the Soviet military's secret commanding center that housed its system of early warning satellites named Oka. On 26 September 1983, the then Lieutenant Colonel Petrov was on duty at Serpukhov 15. His job was to observe the satellites and signals, and alert his superiors about any impending nuclear missile attack against the Soviet Union. In the event of an attack, the Soviet Union's strategy was an immediate and compulsory, all-out nuclear weapons counterattack against the United States. On the night of September 26, an alarm went off signaling that a ballistic nuclear missile was heading towards the Soviet Union from the United States. However, Petrov dismissed it as a computer error, since the US was unlikely to launch just one missile if it were attacking the Soviet Union. It was likely to send multiple missiles simultaneously to disable any Soviet means of a counterattack. Besides, Oka's reliability had been questioned in the past. Thus Petrov dismissed the alarm as a false one and concluded that no missile had actually been launched by the US. His suspicion was confirmed when no missiles arrived. Shortly after, the alarm went off once again. The system showed that a second missile had been launched. Then, it warned a third one being launched, then, a fourth one, and soon a fifth one. All of a sudden the system was roaring. It warned that 5 Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles were coming towards the Soviet Union. As Petrov later recalled, the computer systems in front of him changed their alert from launch to missile strike, and insisted that the reliability of the information was at the highest level. Petrov suspected that the computer system was malfunctioning again, but he had no means of knowing for sure. The Soviet Union's land radar was incapable of detecting any missiles beyond the horizon, and it would be too late by the time the land radar detected the missiles. The pressure was intense. Petrov had little time to decide what to tell his superiors. He finally decided to trust his intuition and once again dismissed the launch reports as a false alarm. Petrov waited. Minutes went by. Had he made the wrong call, the first explosion would have happened by then. But everything was quiet. There were no missiles, no destruction. Thus, Stanislav Petrov saved the world and prevented a third world war. Petrov recalled in an interview, quote, 23 minutes later, I realized that nothing had happened. If there had been a real strike, then I would already know about it. It was such a relief. End quote. He later explained that the decision was based on both on his distrust of the newly installed system, and the information that the US would only launch 5 missiles on a first strike, was rather illogical. So, why did the system malfunction? The Soviet Union utilized the highly elliptical Molniya orbit to detect potentially launched missiles from the US. A rare alignment of the sunlight and the orbits of the satellites resulted in a false alarm. It was later corrected by cross-referencing a geostationary satellite. At first, Petrov was praised for his judgment, and was promised a reward. But subsequently, he underwent intense questioning by his superiors, for failing to record everything in his logbook. Petrov explained it as, quote, "Because I had a phone in one hand and the intercom in the other, and I don't have a third hand." End quote. He never received any reward from the Soviet Union. He was later reassigned to a less sensitive post. He retired from the military in 1984. And he later worked as a senior engineer at the research institute that had created the early warning system. He later resigned to look after his wife, Raisa, who was battling cancer. His wife died in 1997. Petrov's actions on that day saved the world from perhaps the worst disaster it could ever witness. He prevented a war that could wipe out half the population. He prevented the Earth from a nuclear holocaust that could have resulted in irreversible damage. He prevented humanity from suffering from a never-ending nuclear radiation. However, Petrov doesn't consider himself a hero. He says, quote, "I'm not a hero. I was just at the right place at the right time." End quote. Humble words from the man who saved the world. Petrov died on the 19th of May 2017 from hypostatic pneumonia. He was 77. He is survived by his son Dmitry, and a daughter Yelena and grandchildren. Stanislav Petrov has once said, quote, "We are wiser than computers. We created them." End quote. So, subscribe to this channel, so that you could learn more about amazing people like Petrov, and become wiser. And don't forget to ring that bell. If you liked this video, be sure to knock that like button. But if this video was not your cup of tea, then go on knock that dislike button. But either way, tell me your thoughts about this video in the comments below. Oh, one more thing, do share it with your friends and family. Cheerio. I shall see you in the next video.